Greetings, everyone. Gul'dan here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. We're going to continue our bootleg reading of the Tides of War Warcraft novelization of the second game. We left off after Chapter 1, where Lothar had appealed to, what's his name, Taranis, I believe, saying, hey man, you got a war on your hands. And he said, all right, I'll gather the other kings. So stay a while and listen to Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Orgrim Doomhammer, chieftain of the Blackrock clan and war chief of the Horde, surveyed the scene. He stood near the center of Stormwind as his warriors destroyed the once great city around him. Everywhere he turned there was destruction and devastation. Buildings burned despite being made of stone. Bodies and rubble littered the street. Blood flowed across the flagstones, pooling here and there. Screams indicated that survivors had been found and were being tortured. Doomhammer nodded. It was good. That's a little bit messed up. Stormwind had been an imposing city and a powerful obstacle. For a time, he had not been sure they could topple its great walls or overwhelm its stalwart defenders. Despite the Horde's superior numbers, the humans had fought back with skill and determination. Doomhammer respected them for that. They had been worthy opponents. Yet, they had fallen, as all must before his people's might. The city had been breached, its defenders killed or run off, and now this land was theirs, this rich, fertile land so like their own homeworld had been before the cataclysm, before Gul'dan and his folly had destroyed it. I don't think the author would have used that word cataclysm if this was a little later in Warcraft lore and that expansion existed. Doomhammer's thoughts turned grim and his grip tightened on his fabled hammer. Gul'dan, the treacherous shaman turned warlock, had caused more trouble than he was worth. Only his opening the rift to this new world had saved him from being torn apart by enraged clansmen. Yet somehow the schemer had turned even that to his advantage. He had taken control of Blackhand, or perhaps he had always had it. Doomhammer had watched his former chieftain for years and knew the massive orc warrior had been smarter than he let on, but not smart enough. And by playing to Blackhand's ego, Gul'dan had swayed him and taken control. He had been behind the plan to unite the clans into the Horde. Doomhammer was sure of that, and Gul'dan's Shadow Council had ruled from behind the scenes, advising Blackhand in such a way that he never realized they were in fact issuing orders. Doomhammer grinned. That at least was ended now. He had not been pleased at being forced to kill Blackhand. He had been the war chief's second and sworn to fight beside him, not against him, but tradition allowed a warrior to challenge his chieftain for supremacy, and Doomhammer had finally been forced to take that route. He had won, as he knew he must, and with the blow that crushed Blackhand's skull, he had taken control of their clan and of the Horde. That had left the Shadow Council to deal with, and that had been a pleasure. He chuckled at the memory. Few orcs had even known of the Council's existence, much less its membership and sanctuary, but Doomhammer had guessed whom to ask. Half-orc Garona had been tortured into revealing the Council's location. No doubt her non-orc blood made her too weak to withstand much. The look on the warlocks' faces as he had burst into their meeting had been priceless, and even more so their expressions as he had advanced through the room, slaughtering them left and right. Doomhammer had shattered the power of the Shadow Council that day. He would not be controlled as Blackhand had. He would choose his own battles and make his own plans, not to increase anyone's power, but to ensure his people's survival. As if thinking of him had been a summons, Doomhammer spotted two figures approaching him down the road, down the broad, bloodied street. One was shorter than an average orc, the other far taller and with a strange shape. Doomhammer knew them at once, and his lips curled away from his tusks in a sneer. "Have you completed your task, then?" he called out as Gul'dan and his lackey Cho'Gall approached. He kept his gaze on the warlock, barely sparing a sharp glance at his hulking subordinate. Doomhammer had fought ogres all his life, as had most orcs. He had been disgusted when Blackhand had forged an alliance with the monstrous creatures, though he admitted they had their use in combat. But he still did not like or trust them, and Cho'Gall was worse than most. He was one of that rare breed, the two-headed ogre, and had far more intelligence than his brutish brethren. Cho'Gall was a mage in his own right, and the idea of an ogre with such power filled Doomhammer with dread. Plus, Cho'Gall had gained control of the Twilight's Hammer clan, and showed the same fanaticism as the orcs who followed him. That made the two-headed ogre very dangerous, Not that Doomhammer would ever let such concerns show, but he kept his grip on his hammer tight whenever the ogre mage was near. I like this because a lot of these things, like you can tell, as I said before, almost everything they're talking about does not need any, like, it's all in alliance with the Chronicles already. It's all canon.
I have not, noble Doomhammer,
Gul'dan replied, stopping beside him. The warlock looked thin, but otherwise no worse for his months-long slumber.
But I have at last shaken off the last effects of my prolonged slumber, and I bring powerful news drawn from that same long repose. Oh, your sleep has brought you wisdom? It has shown me the path to great power,
Gul'dan admitted, just lust clear in his eyes. But Doomhammer knew it was not an ordinary lust, not for females or fine food or wealth. Gul'dan thought only of power, and would do anything to obtain it. His actions on their own world had proven that.
Power for you, or for the Horde?
Doomhammer demanded.
For both,
the warlock replied. His voice dropped to a sly whisper.
I have seen a place ancient beyond imagining, older even than the sacred mountain of our home world. It lies deep beneath the waves, and within it rests a power that could reshape this world. We could claim it as our own, and none can stand against us. None can stand against us now,
Doomhammer growled back.
And I prefer the honest might of hammer and axe to whatever foul sorceries you have uncovered. Look what your scheming did to our world and to our people the last time. I will not have you destroy them further or wreck this new world just as we have begun to conquer it. This is far greater than your desires,
the warlock snapped, his temper brushing aside any pretense of servility.
My destiny lies beneath the water, and there is little you can do to stop that. This horde is but the first step in our people's path, and it shall be I who lead them beyond here, not you.
Okay.
Have a care, warlock,
Doomhammer replied, his hammer coming up to tap Gul'dan lightly on the cheek.
Remember what happened to your precious Shadow Council. I can crush your skull in an instant, and then where will your destiny lie?
He glowered up at the towering Cho'Gall.
And do not think this abomination will save you,
he snarled, raising the hammer higher and laughing as the ogre mage stepped back, fear washing across both his faces.
I've felled ogres before. Even the Gron. I can and will do so again.
He leaned in close.
Your goals are no longer important. Only the Horde matters.
For an instant he saw anger flicker in Gul'dan's eyes and thought the warlock might not back down, and a part of him rejoiced. Doomhammer had always admired and revered his people's shaman, as had all orcs, but these warlocks were something far different. Their power did not come from the elements or the ancestor spirits, but from some other horrible source. It had been their magic that had turned his people from wholesome brown to gruesome green, and was killing their own world, forcing them to come here just to survive. And Gul'dan was their leader, their instigator, by far the most powerful, most cunning, and most selfish of them all. Doomhammer knew the warlock's value to the Horde, but he could not help but feel they would all be better off without them. Perhaps Gul'dan saw this in his own eyes, for the anger vanished, replaced by caution and grudging respect.
Of course, mighty Doomhammer, the warlock said, dropping his head. You are correct. The Horde must come first.
He grinned, fully recovered from his fright, the anger apparently gone, or at least buried deep once more.
And I have many new ideas to aid our conquest. But first I shall deliver the warriors I promised, unstoppable but fully under your control.
Doomhammer nodded slowly.
Very well, he grated. I will not ignore anything that could make our success more assured.
He turned away, dismissing the warlock and his lieutenant, and Gul'dan took the hint, bowing and walking away, Cho'Gall stomping along beside him. Doomhammer knew he would have to watch both of them very closely. Gul'dan was not one to take an insult lightly, or to allow anyone to control him for long, but until the warlock stepped out of line, his magic would be useful, and Doomhammer would take full advantage of that. The sooner they crushed any opposition, the sooner his people could set aside their weapons and turn to building homes and families once more. With that in mind, Doomhammer sought out another of his lieutenants, finding him at last in what had once been a great hall, feasting upon the food and drink they had found there.
Zuluhed!
The orc shaman glanced up as Doomhammer shouted his name and quickly stood, pushing away the goblet and platter before him. Though old and thin and shriveled, Zuluhed's red-brown eyes were still sharp beneath his tattered gray braids.
Doomhammer?
Unlike Gul'dan, Zuluhed did not snivel or bow, and Doomhammer respected that. But then Zuluhed was a chieftain in his own right, the head of the Dragon Maw clan. He was also a shaman, the only shaman to have accompanied the Horde, and it was those abilities, and what they might provide, that interested Doomhammer.
How goes the work?
Doomhammer did not bother with pleasantries, though he did accept the goblet Zuluhed offered him. The wine within it was fine indeed, and the traces of human blood that had spilled into it only enhanced the flavor.
The same,
the Dragon Maw leader replied, disgust written plainly across his features. Months ago, Zuluhed had approached, telling Doomhammer of strange visions that had plagued him, visions of a particular mountain range and of a mighty treasure buried deep beneath it, a treasure not of wealth but of power. Doomhammer respected the older chieftain and remembered the power of a shaman's visions from their own world. He had approved Zuluhed's request to lead his clan in search of that mountain and the power it concealed. It had taken weeks, but at last the Dragon Maw clan had found a cavern deep in the earth, and within it a strange object, a golden disc they had named the Demon Soul. Though Doomhammer had not seen the artifact himself, Zuluhed had assured him that it radiated immense age and incredible power. Unfortunately, that power was proving difficult to obtain.
You assured me you could trigger its power,
Doomhammer reminded, tossing the empty goblet aside. It struck the far wall with a dull crunch.
And I shall,
Zuluhed assured him.
The demon soul contains immense resources, enough power to let us shatter mountains and tear open the sky.
He frowned.
But thus far it has resisted my magics.
He shook his head.
But I will find the key. I know it. I have seen it in my dreams. And once we can tap its power, we shall use it to enslave our chosen servants. And with them beneath us, we shall rule the skies and rain fire down upon all those who stand against us. Excellent.
Doomhammer clapped the other orc on the shoulder. The shaman's fanaticism worried him from time to time, especially since Zuluhed did not seem to live entirely in this world, but he had no doubts of his loyalty. That was why he had supported the old orc's quest, when he had spurned Gul'dan's request to embark on a similarly vision-based search for power. Doomhammer knew that whatever else happened, Zuluhed would not turn against him or against their people, and if this demon soul could do half what Zuluhed had promised, if it enabled the shaman to make his visions a reality, it would indeed ensure the Horde's superiority in battle.
Send word when all is ready. Of course.
Zuluhed saluted him with his own goblet, which he refilled from a blood-smeared golden pitcher. Doomhammer left the shaman to his celebration and resumed his wanderings through the fallen city. He liked to see what his warriors were doing firsthand, and he knew that, seeing their leader walking among them, gave the others a sense of him as one of them, bonding them to him ever more tightly. Blackhand had known that as well, making sure his orcs saw him as a fellow warrior as well as a chieftain and later war chief, and it was one of the lessons Doomhammer had learned well from his predecessor. His meeting with Zuluhed had wiped away the sour taste Gul'dan had left in his mouth, and as he stalked through the streets, Doomhammer found his spirits high. His people had achieved a great victory here, and deserved to celebrate. He would let them enjoy themselves for a few days. Then they would move on to the next target. Gul'dan watched Doomhammer from a few buildings away.
What are he and Zuluhed planning?
He demanded, not turning away from glaring at the war chiefs retreating back.
I do not know,
Jokal admitted.
They have been secretive about it. I know it involves something the Dragon Maw found in the mountains. Half their clan is there now, but I do not know what they are doing. Well, it does not matter.
Gul'dan frowned, rubbing absently at one tusk as he thought.
Whatever it is, it serves to keep Doomhammer distracted, and that works to our advantage. It would not do for him to uncover our own plans before we can set them in motion.
He grinned.
And then it would be too late for him. Will you replace him as war chief?
Jokal's other head asked as they moved away, returning to the quarters that had been set aside for them.
Myself? No,
Gul'dan laughed.
I have no desire to march through the streets with an axe or a hammer, meeting my foes in the flesh,
He admitted.
My path is the far greater one. I shall meet them in spirit and crush them from afar, devouring them by the hundreds and the thousands.
He smiled at the thought.
Soon all that was promised me shall be mine, and then Doomhammer will be as nothing against me. Even the might of the Horde will pale before me, and I shall stretch out my hand and wipe this world clean, to remake it in my own image.
He laughed again, and the sound came back to him from the tumbled walls and torn buildings as if the dying city were laughing with him. All right, so not much happened. We have got a little bit more of just a tiny bit of development of what Gul'dan and Cho'Gall are up to, but not much because we've already kind of touched on all that. But we did establish that Zuluhed, and just like we read in the Chronicles, Zuluhed has the demon soul, and they're working on it to become dragon riders. All right, we got another episode in the pipes, 5x5. I thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you on the next episode of Lore of Warcraft.